Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, today I'm going to talk about a game that called a spy camera when I got it in the mail. And nobody watched that video because I guess they were thinking I was going to get a spy camera, and who wants to see that? Well, some people want to see that. I think some people are disappointed. And as I already explained in another video, which you're not going to see yet, or I'm not going to release yet, because it's a review of another game, which shall be remain nameless, for the time being. I explained that video that I call something that I get in the mail a spy camera because I used to have packages delivered to my friend's house because mine wasn't that secure. My doorstop. Occasionally, I'd gotten one or two things stolen, so I got a little gun shy, and so he used to text me, "Your spy camera came." Just like when you order things out of the back of a comic book and you get your spy camera, X-ray glasses, or God knows what else. But anyhow, I want to talk about Technoir. This is one of the games I picked up and got intrigued by not only a few things that Anthony Runeslinger Boyd had said, but also I watched the video by the creator, by Jeremy Keller. He had a video about the mechanic, and I found the mechanic kind of interesting too. So I figured, well, let me go pick up. There's a whole bunch of games I've decided to go pick up that are like way outside my comfort zone. And there's some games I'd like, I really want to get this because I'm really intrigued by this system or that system or whatnot. And this one is one of them, but not as intrigued. But this thing is just way outside my comfort zone. For starters, this is much more of a story game. I mean, it's a role-playing game to be sure, but it is definitely more of a narrative game than I'm usually used to. So I figured, what the heck, I could give this sucker a try and see what it was all about, because it had some intriguing sounding mechanics. First off, this book is like stupidly good quality. I mean, just in terms of its softcover, but as far as the layout, as far as the writing, as far as the pictures, really cool. I mean, not like tons of artwork, but everything in here is just it's attractive. It's mostly just blue and white and black, but a few like color pictures and whatnot. It is noir genre with kind of like tech. So it's sort of cyberpunkish, Blade Runner-ish. Not really Blade Runners, but you know what I mean. There's technical doodads and gizmos, so it's more like cyberpunk. So you've got their usual. They've got the giant internet going wild, and so you can tap into that via devices or actual implants in yourself, and you can have cyber arms and cyber legs, and you can be the Bionic Man. New eyes, new ears, all that kind of good junk. However, that's peripheral to the game. That's part of the world you live in. But then it's kind of a noir thing. It's kind of those kind of dark, gritty stories where the main characters at the end of the day, you're not really sure, did they really win? What really happened? Everything kind of sucks for everybody, mostly. I think noir, and what I think is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I have to watch some more noir movies and read some more noir books. It's not even a term that I really knew until later because I'm not really that sophisticated. I was not a literature guy. However, the way this book is written is really cool too. It is written in a very recursive manner. Like, you will see the same page over and over again, or the same example on a character sheet. And I made a video about that already. I love that. I love when you don't have to go flipping back and forth, here and there in a book to find information that was on page 3, and I have to go back to that. So that makes the page count bigger. But in terms of a game that tells you how to play it, this thing is top notch. Like, really probably one of the most impressive pieces of writing I've seen in a long time. So that's my first thought as I read the game. But this video really isn't about that, is it? Let's talk about how this game works and what I thought about it. We'll say though that the quality of the PDF is also top notch. So quality-wise, overall game physically great. Then you open the book up, and it instantly starts to tell you how to play the game. Not just in terms of the mechanics and what to do, which it is awesome at that, but also tells you why you should do this, what you shouldn't do, why you shouldn't do that. It goes right off into explaining to you that, well, this is going to be a noir game. The purpose, everything that you're doing in this game is to enforce or create this noir feel, to create this noir story. The story isn't pre-planned, so to speak, but you're making your decisions based on, this is the outcome we want. It really actually kind of, as I read this, as I thought about it, as I kind of like wrapped my head around the mechanics and everything that worked in this game, it made me to understand narrativism a little bit more than I think I had in the past. And, whereas, in a style like I would play, it's more like more simulation style. When my my thought process for like, am I going to do this or not, as I'm considering an action, is this going to benefit my character? Is this something that my character would do? Maybe it won't benefit them, but does this line up with my character? If I'm playing in a more gamist manner, I've certainly done that before. Played, just like let's hack and slash and let's accomplish this objective. Then really the goal is like, will this benefit the player? Will I win? This game here is when you're deciding upon an action, it's will this serve this genre? It's very narrative. So I think I understand that a little bit better than I did prior to really reading this book and then really, just absorbing all of it. Anyhow, goes right into how to play the game. It lets you know that, you should not be creating characters or letting your players create characters that live outside that noir genre. And so if you're making some kind of, badass assassin who is able to, shoot crime bosses from a distance and always get away, that's the wrong character. That's the wrong character concept. You're not playing noir. You're more like Humphrey Bogart. You're more like Eddie Valiant. Life is tough for you. It also talks about here that the characters are going to get beat up, and that's mechanically how they end up getting stronger. But it's not a surgical game where you're going to get in and out and take out the bad guy, so to speak. You're a protagonist. They're antagonists in this game, but you're going to get dirty. You're going to get battered. You're going to get bloody and bruised, and that's the intent of playing this is you're going to experience that genre. Then it kind of goes off on left field in terms of like how you do that. I'm a guy I'm used to numbers, and this game is all about words. And there are 9 stats, but they're not called stats, they're called verbs, and they end up on your character sheet. And the way that you actually do your point buy, if you will, is as you're creating a character, you choose, I think it's 3 professions. I think that's the right word. Or programs, actually. It's kind of learning programs. And each program comes with some verbs that you get to add more to the verbs. In other words, like I'm going to say, if you're a bodyguard, you take the bodyguard program, you can increase coax, fight, and treat all by 1. Those are some of the verbs that you have, the stats, if you will. You can also choose one of the adjectives that you can add on your sheet as well. So if you're a bodyguard, you can choose either alert, patient, or protective. So the actual 9 stats or verbs, if you will, are coax, detect, fight, hack, move, operate, prowl, shoot, and treat. And so anytime you perform an action, you say, I want to do this, either you or the game master at some point is going to say, well, that sounds like you're trying to fight. This sounds like you're trying to hack. This sounds like you're trying to operate something, whether it's a car or whether it's, some machinery or, God knows what else. Treat. That's pretty. That's more like if you're a doctor, you're going to try to splice a new, graft a new like a bionic arm onto somebody, or if somebody's wounded. And coaxing is more like social interaction, talking, all that kind of stuff. But that's when it shows up. That's when you start to invoke the mechanics. The more little dots you have on this from 1 to 5, say in coax, so you have 3. Well, that's how many action dice you get to roll. Now that doesn't mean you don't get to roll more dice. You absolutely do, and I'll get to that. But that's how you're starting to create your character. So when you're all done with your character and your character sheet, you're going to end up with a bunch of scores and a bunch of verbs, but you're also going to end up with some adjectives on your sheet. And these adjectives are going to be what's called locked, and they're going to apply to your character all the time. So you might end up with a character that is fast and sneaky and observant, maybe. And that's what you end up with. And that kind of influences not only narratively what your character is like, but also mechanically what they can do or how they can enhance what they do. Didn't want to spend too much time on character creation itself, but characters also end up picking connections from what's called a transmission. It's kind of like the, what kind of adventure or, scenario you're going to run. They pick some connections. There's some people in that actual scenario that they actually know, they have some kind of connection with. Then they get to pick some adjectives, like what is their connection with this person actually like? And it could be something like they feel affectionate or lustful or trusting or sympathetic, respectful, something like that. And then they end up, buying stuff. They end up with a certain amount of creds. So, and they can also borrow more from a loan shark. So the game has loan sharks, really noir. You can end up with all your kind of cool, neat stuff. But let's get on to well, how does this game really work? It's worth noting in passing that objects in this game also have things like adjectives assigned to them. And, we'll get to how that really works at the end. But I want to go into Well, how do you come up with a story? Because it's different. It's really, really interesting. This is the part I had to read a few times to really kind of wrap my head around it. Because the first time I read it, I was like, what the heck's going on? But the game includes 3 transmissions in here. And transmission is kind of like this idea for a story. It's not complete. It's just this kind of scenario, but the scenario can go various different ways. There's also other transmissions available on the Technoir website, and you can make your own after you kind of run through these. And it's kind of recommended. After looking at this game, this is something you probably should go with what they have first to really kind of wrap your head around this, get good at it. But this part of it that just made me smile. There is pretty much this master table. It's 6 by 6. This is like so old school. Like I swear to God, I'm looking at like a D&D random table. And it runs through things like connections, events, factions, locations, objects, and threats. There's 6, and you can roll a die to see which one you're going to take something out of. And then there's 6 possible names, and so it could be names of 6 connections or 6 possible events, like a high-speed pursuit, or a murder scene, or a tremor, or 6 different locations, or 6 different objects, like an executive limousine, or a machine gun, a Gatomatic, or a sex file, or the serpent. All kinds of crazy stuff, and threats like corrupt cops. You get the idea. But in the beginning, you don't necessarily have to do any kind of random stuff. You pick out 3 plot ideas from this whole big list, and you make this mission seed. So you start this little map, these three ideas, and you draw little lines to them, and you start to make up why these things are connected as a game master. So as the players are getting their characters ready, figuring out who their connections are in this map, they figure out these particular people, why do they know them, that kind of stuff. What is their relationship with them? You start to come up with ideas of what's going on. What's the little story that might be going on based on these 3 plot points. As the players start interacting with people, then you start connecting more of the dots. You start throwing more of the things from this big master table down and start to make up more of a story. Well, how are these people connected together? What did somebody do? And it's usually some down and dirty, nasty stuff. Somebody murdered somebody. Somebody framed somebody else. There's maybe a riot that's going to happen, or somebody's going to do some kind of heist or whatnot. It's something that Eddie Valiant should be figuring out. Why in the world did Marvin Acme get murdered? Okay, I just love that movie. So I hate to bring such a funny movie into such a dark game, but it works. I think that's one of the best examples of noir ever. I actually read something on the internet, so it must be true, that said it was the same thing. But you start to come up with a story, this plot, this idea, and then at some point you can stop connecting the dots. You don't have to keep going as the game master, and it pretty much lets you know like where should you kind of break off and say you've got a cool enough or decent enough or complicated enough web of stuff going on that the players have kind of helped make based on their actions and who they went to and what they did and what they started asking. That now you can kind of let things go, let the players interact with the world and see what happens. So you kind of discover what the real story is going to be just as they do, which is kind of interesting. It's a little old school in some ways when we used to like have this basic idea of what's going on, but you do that kind of a lazy DM prep type thing. So I kind of smiled when I saw that. But it gives you a more codified method of how do you do this? How do you actually end up creating that? And it gives you this big giant web to kind of draw. It makes you like draw this on a piece of paper so you know exactly what's going on. Write yourself some little notes. So now you've got this story, or this, not even story, you've got the complicated web of relationships, because the game is a lot about relationships. And then we see what happens next. So what happens when the players actually interact in the world? Now I'm not going to go through how to unravel a mystery story and how to bring this to a satisfying conclusion, because I'm not the right guy to be talking about that. My frame of reference for noir is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. There's people that know a lot more about noir than I do that could explain that better. And the book actually kind of walks you through it, not only how to create a plot, but also kind of how to bring this to a satisfying conclusion for the most part. And Jeremy is one of the people who knows about noir, so I'll leave it to them. But I want to talk a little bit more about how the game actually works, like what really happens. What are you going to do other than role play to make this stuff happen? And I'll refer you once again to Jeremy's video where he talks about the game mechanic, but I'll go through it a little bit as well. Now your character has these attributes. They're called verbs because there are things like prowl. And every time you try to do something in the game, at some point you're going to state an intention, and maybe you say, well, my character is going to try to sneak and avoid all these detectors here and try to get into this crime boss's house. So say we're going to use prowl, and you've got a 3 in prowl. So you get to roll 3 white dice, and the game recommends you use white, black, and red dice to represent different things. So you're going to roll 3 white dice, and these are going to be your I think they're called action dice. Then you're going to see if you have any adjectives on your sheet that would help you in this particular situation, because you can add push dice. Every character starts out with 3 push dice. There's a push dice economy, which I'll get into a little bit later. But anytime you want to activate one of your adjectives, you better have some push dice that have not been, that are, you know, unused. And you literally have a spot in your character sheet for charged push dice, uncharged push dice. Every turn you get to charge the push dice you still have. And then as things go on, you can use these push dice to either try to apply adjectives to somebody else, or try to deflect adjectives that are being attached to you. And there's a little economy that's going on with that. So say really what you're trying to do at this point is you're trying to sneak past a guard at this crime boss's house. So you want to maybe apply the adjective, fooled to them. I'm coming up with this, probably not a great adjective. So at that point, you're not only going to roll these 3 action dice, but let's say that you have in your character sheet that you're sneaky. Okay, so you get to add, that's an adjective. So you add another black die, you add a push die to that roll. And say you've got some other push dice laying around, and say you have this stealth suit. It's a thermal stealth suit, and I'm not going to think of an adjective fast enough, but there's an adjective on the stealth suit that pretty much allows you to fool thermal sensors. And so because I'm not thinking of this adjective right off the top of my head, we're going to say that I did. So now I've got 2 push dice. So I'm rolling 2 black dice, 3 white dice, and at that point, then maybe I have hurt dice. And these are the red dice. Maybe I'm bleeding. Maybe I've already taken some kind of injury from somebody in a scuffle with one of this guy's thugs earlier in the game. And I have this adjective that's still sticking to me called bleeding. So when I have to roll one of these red dice, and that's going to be a hurt die. And say I have another die attached to me. Let's say it's called twisted. Maybe I twisted my ankle not so long ago, kind of running away from this this goon after he hurt me. So now I've got a twisted die. So now I've got 2 hurt dice that would apply to me trying to be stealthy in this particular case, and apply fooled to this guard. So I have to roll not only 3 white dice and 2 black dice, my 2 push dice, but I also have to roll 2 hurt dice. Then what happens is you roll all these dice. If a particular number comes up on a hurt die, let's say I get a 6 on a hurt die, any 6s that come up on my white ability dice or action dice or my black push dice, that cancels those out. So if I ever had any other 6s there, they're gone. So pretty much I'm left with the white and the black dice are still on the table, my action dice and my push dice, and I want to see which number's highest, because that's my final result. And I need to beat whatever this guard, in this case, whatever this guard's ability is that might be able to stop me from prowling. And let's say it's detect. And say I roll above 4 is going to be my highest roll. And say this guy has a detect of 3. Well, then I have actually, oh look, I've got a notification. And I was able to beat this guard. I was able to apply this adjective of fooled to the guard. And now at this point, I have the opportunity to leave this as is. It's a very transient adjective. It's only going to last for a second. Or until to the next scene or next turn to this guy, so I can get by there. Or I can make it sticky, where he has to do something to get rid of it. Or I can make it locked, and you have to spend a certain number of push dice. Say I have 1 push die left, and so I'm going to spend this push die, give it to the game master, and say I want this. He wants to be fooled. I want to sticky die. So say I can prowl around this estate for a while, and this guy isn't going to figure out that I'm there because I made it sticky. He's going to have to do something to get rid of that, or somebody else is going to have to do something to get rid of that for him. Now at this point, I end up with 2 push dice that I can recharge and use again, because all I used them to do was to activate adjectives on my character sheet. But I actually spent one of my push dice to apply this adjective to this antagonist for a longer period of time. So there's a push dice economy that goes on. The game master starts with none. The players end up giving them to the game master as they start to apply these negative adjectives to their adversaries, and then they don't have it anymore. Well, how do they get them back? Some of you have already figured out how the players get these push dice back. The game master has the antagonist apply negative adjectives to them and make them stick, or make them permanent, make them locked as it is. If you actually spend 2 push dice, then you can lock an adjective to somebody. So perhaps you've sprained somebody's ankle. So you've broken somebody's ankle. So one of the antagonists breaks your ankle. They apply the adjective broken to you. The game master spends 2 push dice, and now your ankle's broken and it's locked. You're going to require some treatment to get that sucker fixed before you're going to be able to walk again. Maybe you end up having your foot severed which can happen in the game. And that's okay because we got all these guys willing to splice on bionic legs to you and everything. But it's a bummer. You're getting the crap beat out of you. And you can have the crap beat out of you physically, mentally, emotionally in this game. You can have all kinds of adjectives applied to you. But that's how you get your push dice back, is by being hurt. So this is economy back and forth as you're kind of slugging it out. And, you know, I think there's been some criticism of this game, which I was not aware of. In fact, Anthony said, you know, there's some issues with the system, or issues people have had with the system. Why don't you try to figure them out? And that was the first one I kind of came up with, as, you know, off the top of my head was, you know, using adjectives can be a little bit difficult and a little bit tricky. And it's very easy to, it's a very much a player skill thing here, because you want it to be this slow build, you want it to be this noir feel, so you're not applying these major adjectives to the antagonist and villain. The rules pretty much say you can't do that, don't do that. You're not going to like be making people dead. It's this kind of slow build up where you're finding their secrets out, so you're confused, you're making them enraged, you're making them awed at the fact that you know all this stuff. Back and forth. It's just this noir story that's happening, and you know they're applying adjectives to you back and forth that, you know, may not always be they're beating you up, but they might be emotionally scarring you, physically scarring you. You know, maybe you do get, you know, roughed up by the thugs, but you just show up there kind of you know, with a bag over your head, you know, bleeding, and maybe you're missing a tooth, but you know they haven't killed you. And of course, once again, you can get stuff repaired. You can die in this game. It's a little bit difficult, but you can actually do it. So at that point, you know, I said the characters get tougher over time. Well, how does that actually happen? And here's where the other criticism of the game actually kind of falls in. One of the other things I thought of off the top of my head is, well, this could be kind of like this unending battle back and forth, where you're, you know, you hurt them, they hurt you, back and forth, you know, bam, bam, bam. When does this really end? A lot of this depends upon the players and the game masters realizing that what the decisions they're making are going to create this noir story. That's their intention. So to be careful about what they do. It's a very different than like your standard, like it's not standard, but a little bit of slugfest, you know, role-playing game where you're in more of an antagonistic conflict with the antagonists, for lack of a better term, where you're not really worried about, you know, what kind of story we're kind of enforcing here, genre we're enforcing. Maybe you're going for a genre, but this is all about that. This is all about that. So that was another, you know, idea I had, that maybe that's one of the criticisms. But anyhow, let's talk about how characters actually improve, because that's where some of the criticisms end up. It's worth noting here too that if you have any undischarged push dice as a player character or as a game master, you can actually use these to kind of raise the stakes, raise the difficulty. And let's go back with this character that had, you know, he tried to sneak past the guard. He tried to apply that adjective of fool to the guard. Now, in that case, I used 2 push dice to, you know, activate my adjectives to, you know, add more dice to the roll. And then I had 1 push die left. And in that example, I used that other push die to increase that adjective from fleeting to sticky. So he was fooled for a good long time, or at least for that kind of duration of that scene. I think it varies from you know, a circumstance to circumstance, because it's all about, you know, what's going on in the narrative, what's going on with the fiction, what makes sense. Well, let's just say I don't do that. I hang on to one of these because I'm thinking I might need one of these push dice during the rest of this turn, because, you know, I might get into some other kind of trouble. Now, say that the next guard, you know, you walk in and sure enough there's another guard there. Oops, well, it didn't really work on this guy. And you can actually try to apply adjectives to several people at once. But let's just say this is what happens. And say this guy decides he's going to use his fight verb against you, and you're going to use your fight verb in defense. There's always another verb they're trying to beat. And this guy is going to pretty much try to apply the adjective broken to you. He's going to try to break one of your teeth. Not fun getting a broken tooth, I can tell you that. And so he does that. He's rolling these dice, and you decide, hey, I have this undischarged push die left. I'm going to raise the difficulty level on this guy. So let's say you have a fight of 3. You say, okay, I'm going to use this last push die. You're not going to get rid of it, but you're going to discharge it, so it's still yours. And I say, okay, I'm going to raise the difficulty of this. So now he's got to be a 4, not a 3. So you see, rolls the dice, doesn't quite make it. Hooray, you don't get a broken tooth here. Okay, so that's how that particular thing works. But then, you know, how do you actually improve? Now, this game, the character sheets in this game are awesome. Like, they have, I mean, they're just, and once again, I said, you know, a million times, it's really recursive. So it keeps showing you pictures here, you know, over and over and over. How does this work? But every single adjective on your sheet has 2 little squares next to it, so you can mark, is it fleeting? You don't mark anything. Is it sticky? You mark 1. Is it locked? You mark 2. And every single one of these 9 verbs has this little dot at the end of it. You know, you can fill in all the squares you have from 1 to 5. You know, how good am I at this? There's a little dot at the end. You can tick off when it's been primed. How does a verb get primed? It's primed when you fail at something. It's very much like a lot of other role-playing games, where if you happen to fail at particular skills, then you have a chance for improvement later on. Sometimes they make you earn experience points, but in this particular game, the verb gets primed. So let's say you're in a position now where you're going to have some kind of restoration done on you. Say you actually ended up, say you got that broken ankle. That's a locked adjective, and you want to get that thing fixed. Or say you actually had your foot severed. It's pretty bad. I don't know if a broken ankle would be locked or sticky. Probably, Anyhow, it doesn't really matter. You need some healing, so you go to the doc. You go to the splicer. You go to somebody. Hey, I need this fixed up here. I just got the crap beat out of me by this Kingpin's thugs. So at that point, as there's a treat roll being made on you, you have a chance to improve one of your primed verbs. So say you've got 3 or 4 of these suckers have been primed. You've been having a bad time of it. You've been failing at applying some adjectives to your friends, your antagonists, whatever it happens to be. At that point, let's say you decide, I want to improve coax. I'm not all that good at coax, and I'm not all that good with persuasion, all that kind of stuff. So you just have a 2 in coax. All right, we're going to try to improve that. And as they're making these rolls, you also have to apply hurt dice for every negative adjective you have, on you. So you might be rolling quite a few hurt dice. If any of one of those hurt dice actually exceeds the, how good you are or something. So say if a hurt dice exceeds 2, say you have a 2 in coax, then that prime verb of coax, well, just got increased by 1. Hooray, you got stronger. Now, here's where the other real criticism of the game lies, is the fact that this can work the same way for the antagonist as it does in the protagonist. So the criticism was, hey, while the player characters are getting better by being beaten up, and subsequently getting healed and whatnot, but pretty much by being beaten up, you don't get better at anything until you've gotten the crap beat out of you. Well, the antagonists are going to get better and more powerful by being beaten up as well. What gives? Now, I won't give you the page number or anything like that, but there's a couple spots in the book where it's, to me, it's really clear. This is something that you can skip this. You may skip this part. For antagonists, their scores don't improve. And I had a conversation with Anthony, and he kind of clued me in. That's what the real quibble people had with the game was. And I found another spot in the game, and let's see if I can dig this up here, what it actually said. I'm probably not going to be able to, but where it pretty much says, it's in terms of like winning and losing, the mechanics only gauge the narrative as it is now, give you a way to change your next action. If you want to know who's winning or losing, you have to judge by what's happening in the fiction. So it's very up to the game master, it's up to the players, it's up to figure out, like, hey, what's going on with this fiction, what's going on with our noir genre here, what makes sense to be happening right now. And part of what Anthony kind of mentioned to me is the idea that you could probably have antagonists improve a little bit in the beginning, but then at some point you realize it's just going to be the stalemate. So if you are having them improve a little bit, you stop. That makes perfect sense to me, because once again, every decision you're making in this game, as a player, as a game master, the very first consideration you should have is it supporting this genre? Is it supporting this type of story that we're trying to create? And this is something I kind of was able to wrap my head around, more about, not only about this game, but just about the narrative style of play by the way this book was written. So, I can't say enough good about this book. How much will I enjoy playing this game? I am not sure. I really am hot to try it out, but it's going to be way outside my comfort zone. But at the end of the day, to me, this is my personal opinion, that the criticism kind of falls flat, because if you're playing the game correctly, if you're following the instructions, not just about when to roll this die, when to invoke this mechanic, how many feet do you move here, all the usual instructions we're used to in role-playing games. If you follow the instructions in this book, then the game should go correctly. You should not end up in those stalemates. You should not end up in these situations, where it doesn't work out. It doesn't turn into a noir story. Now, if you're trying to simply beat the antagonist and be that crazy sniper character I talked about in the beginning, and take out the Kingpin, well, you're not playing the game correctly either. So this game is very prescriptive in a different way than I'm used to. I mean, I got used to that idea in something like Circle of Hands, where Ron Edwards said these are some things you need to do, but otherwise you're really not playing this game correctly. And I appreciate it, even though that was going from a much more simulationist standpoint. But with this game here, it's about enforcing this particular genre. And I'm used to playing some games now where we are enforcing a particular genre. We're playing All for One. We're enforcing swashbuckling and swashbuckling horror. And I've enforced other genres in the past without really even thinking about it. Like swords and sorcery, high fantasy, all that kind of good junk. Space opera versus science fiction. We want to kind of delve down into that a little bit. Here, I think if you follow the instructions in the book, and they're really well laid out, you can't get into trouble. So, my analysis of the criticism of the game is I don't buy it. That's my personal opinion. But yeah, that's my review of Technoir. I really enjoyed this game. I enjoyed reading it. I had to read it a few times to really get all the nuances. It made me think a lot, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. And really kind of taking the game apart. How does this really work? Why does it work the way it works? And yeah, I'm really happy with the game, and it's not that expensive. So cool stuff. And that's my rather long review of Technoir.